Good afternoon. My name is Jessica Kline, and before I present my project to you, I would like to say thank you to both of my faculty advisors, Dr. Patricia Young from our Education Department, and Dr. Stanley McCrae from our Modern Language and Linguistics Department, And I would also like to say thank you to my INDS advisors. Formerly it was Mr. James Jones, and now it is Dr. Lisa Vetter. And thank you to Carrie Slaughter as well. Please raise your hand if you are multilingual, if you speak more than one language. Okay. Please keep your hand up in the air if your first language is a language other than English. Okay. Thank you. So it may come to a surprise to you, or maybe not, that there are 5.5 million limited English proficiency students, or LEP students, in our public schools. In our neighboring state, Virginia, there are 68,000 English language learners and 40,000 in Pennsylvania. The title of my presentation, or my project, is called Intercultural Competence in an Elementary Classroom. This project is important to me. First, I'm graduating in May with not only my INDS degree, but a certificate in elementary education. And a goal as a teacher is to have an inclusive, multicultural classroom. Might not have been able to tell by the hands in the air in here, but it is shown that diversity in our nation and our schools is increasing significantly. And myself, as well as some of the authors that I reviewed, believe that it is important not to leave any child left behind based on their ethnicity or cultural background. And having a multicultural classroom, it doesn't just benefit international students, it benefits every student in the class. The question that I focused on is, what is the role of intercultural competence in an elementary academic setting? The methodology that I used was a literature review that includes the perspectives of the following disciplines: education, psychology, anthropology, and a little bit of history. The bridging strategies that I incorporated into my project are Boyce Mancia's Advancing Through Checks and Balances. This applies to my project because, as you will soon hear, one of my concepts is learning styles. And both psychology and education have two very different perspectives on this concept. However, in both perspectives, there is a way or a learning approach that is effective in the classroom. So it's kind of like psychologist checks the education perspective, creating a balance that there is indeed a way, a learning approach that is effective and helps students acquire knowledge. I also use Newell's redefinition strategy. I found in my research that there are different terms that are similar in context to intercultural competence. And the two that I am pointing out here, I believe, are significant and they're a little bit different in definition. Intercultural competence is based more on the social skills with people in different cultures, whereas cross-cultural competence relies more on the cognitive behaviors of individuals in different environments. I combined both of those definitions to make one relevant definition, and that is the ability to use cognitive and behavioral components to successfully communicate, interact, and adapt to individuals in such environments that are culturally different. My first concept is learning styles. It's an overarching concept in the disciplines of education, psychology, and anthropology. And like I said, each discipline has a different perspective on this concept. Educators, on one hand, use and believe Howard Gardner's theory of multiple intelligence and use learning styles all across their country. They use the learning styles in the curriculum and daily lesson plans every day. And they believe that by using learning styles in the classroom, you're getting to know your students on an individual basis, and that is creating a more successful environment. Psychologists, on the other hand, say no. There is no scientific evidence of Gardner's theory, so it should not be used in the classroom. There needs to be some other valid approach. And they believe that it's not learning styles that are being used in the classroom. It's more so the student's interest or preference. And from anthropology, or a more cultural perspective, they believe that there are cultural learning styles that are embedded and engraved in different cultural communities. And based on these three perspectives on learning styles, I found that there is some common ground. No matter if it is Howard Gardner's theory or cultural learning styles, or if it is simply just student interest or preference, there is still an effective approach that works in the classroom. My second concept is teaching strategies, and before I go into some of the main points that I found, I think it is important to give you the definition of multicultural education, because in its definition it implies certain things that should be done in a classroom. And that is the learning about, preparing for, and celebrating cultural diversity, or learning to be bicultural. First, educators need to get to know their students, and they should definitely not stereotype them. If you have several students of the same ethnicity or cultural background in your class, you shouldn't assume that they're all going to learn the same way, because most of the time they're not going to. Also, you need to create a secure and student-centered environment. If students are feeling a lack of security or feel like they're in a hostile environment in school, their concentration is going to go out the door. They're going to be focusing on something totally different, and it's not going to be learning. Sorry. Also, we need to provide more information and history of different ethnic groups. And in doing so, we need to provide positive and unbiased images for our students on these groups. And most importantly, I think it's important that educators don't shy away from this topic. It's something that we should be open about with our students. We can discuss the differences amongst our students, or of different ethnicities or cultural backgrounds. And using such strategies will positively affect student attitudes. And using cooperative learning activities in the classroom, it's going to affect their attitudes, or their racial attitudes, for every student. And lastly, my third concept that I focused on is policies. And multicultural education requires changes in school programs, practices, and their policies. In the 1960s and the 70s, there was the social action of African Americans and people of color, as well as the women's rights movement. And both of these groups insisted on having curricula that is more inclusive of their histories and their experiences. There has been a significant change between the 60s and now, but there is still more that can be done in the classroom, and some of those things I've mentioned when I was going over the strategies. There have been some new policies for English language learners. Back in 2004, our U.S. Secretary of Education, Rod Page, announced new policies. But before going into those policies, it's important that you know that schools must show an adequate yearly progress, which is AYP, and that makes sure that all students achieve academic proficiency. And LEP students are included in these calculations. And remember that LEP students that are new to the United States, they're often having difficulties because of language barriers or lack of schooling before they came here. So the new policy that was announced was that LEP students have the option of taking reading and language arts assessments and the English language proficiency assessment. And the schools have up to 2 years to include the LEP students in the AYP calculations. I did find one limitation while doing my project, and that was I was hoping to find more hard evidence, more data that showed the academic success and the performance of the students, more relating to their grades. How are they benefiting from being in a multicultural environment? So in the future, as I said, I'm going to be a teacher, and I would like to do my own research, and maybe when getting my master's degree, I can come back here and maybe do another capstone project and use my own research as well. And I would also like to conclude by emphasizing the importance of this project. As corny as it may sound, kids are our future, and it's important that every student has the equal opportunity to have the best educational experience, no matter what their background is. Thank you.
I need to say that in the years since I've been here, I came here in the 80s, and 1981, and the complexion, as it were, of UMBC is a lot different now than it was then, and I can see the differences in learning styles. In some of the classes that I have, like intercultural communication class or world of language, I have between 50 and 100 students in those classes, and I can see it reflected even in the way they answer certain questions on essay exams. I go crazy trying to read that many essays, but it gives me a lot of insight into the fact that some of them absorb the material in a completely different way than others. So I think it's a really worthwhile project that you did.
Thank you.
Well, I was interested in your comment about Howard Gardner. Stephen, you may know this. He was trained in psychology, wasn't he? So what is what she reported consistent with what you know?
Yeah, he's a cognitive psychologist, and but his theory of multiple intelligence was rooted in biological evidence and other neurobiological difficulties. But there certainly is a debate, and there are gaps between. So what you're saying is, why would there be a gap between what the psychologists are saying about the approach in the classroom and what educators are saying in the program? And
specifically, Howard Gardner, who is a psychologist.
So give us an example of a psychologist who's saying that a multiple intelligences approach is inappropriate in the classroom. Because you were saying that was the debate in psychology, right?
I don't know off the top of my head anyway. But the article that I was reading was saying that there isn't scientific evidence to prove that his theory of the learning styles is a valid approach in the classroom. That's what I was reading about.
So you're basing it on one article?
There was a couple, and both of them relatively said the same thing.
Written by psychologists?
Yes.
So it wasn't a journalist. It wasn't a journalist writing about it. It was in where was the article published? I mean, because when we're looking for.
Excuse me?
One of them was in the Chronicle of Higher Education. We reported on this article. I know exactly what you and the finding, and I use this a lot in my classes, and you correct me if I'm wrong because it was a while back, but wasn't it the case that it wasn't the fact that different children have different learning styles as individuals, but rather different tasks in the class?